His name is Heston Blumenthal. He's on a lifetime's mission to delve deeper into the secrets behind our cooking and eating, and now he's invited us along for the ride. My name's Jay Taylor, Heston's TV producer, and your host for this adventure to the centre of food, along with James Winter, our Fat Duck producer. And on today's show, it's grown on every continent on Earth except Antarctica. It's the staple food of more than half the world's population, and it's even used to hold together the Great Wall of China. Today we are exploring rice. From paella to sushi, Rice Krispies to sake, we're discovering the secrets behind this amazing ingredient. So without further ado, let's meet the man who loves a good paddy, Heston Blumenthal.
Oh, nice one, Jay.
Did you know that?
Oh, yes.
I thought you were going to end with rice to see you, to see
That's a good one.
Oh, my God.
Rice and easy.
I'm going to change
Very
triple
good.
trips now to trice cooked chips. And you stole my thunder because I was going to do the Great Wall of China.
Oh, did you know that as well? I was that.
Starch.
We clearly Googled the same places. Is that what it was?
It's starch, and in fact, we'll come on to it. But that's one of the keys to me. What I think about harnessing rice's ability to be used for so many different things. It depends on how much you polish it. So all rice is brown, but brown rice will only last for a short period of time. Once you've removed the brown cover, rice can age for 10 to 30 years. And the more outside cover you remove, the more proteins and oils you remove, and the more starches are left behind. So do you want to use the rice for flavour? It's starch. If so, it has two different types of starch. Do you want to use it for binding? Hence the Great Wall of China.
That's amazing. So it is literally a kind of building block almost. I think that 10 to 30 years shelf life's amazing.
And talking about that, we call DNA the building block of life and protein. And rice, I think, has something like, it's not the exact figure, but 30% DNA of human beings.
Yeah. Wow.
Rice to see you.
More in common with rice than we thought.
To see you, rice.
Right, well, we'll come back to rice in just a minute. But before that, we've had some correspondences. Thank you to everyone out there who keeps getting in touch with us. We love it, and it makes a big difference to sparking imagination from Heston and leading to places we do not know where. So please do keep getting in touch. HestonsPodcast@gmail.com and Heston's Podcast on Instagram. Plus, do us a favour, subscribe while you're there. Send some comments, those kind of things. Apparently it helps algorithms and stuff, and it's nice to have you along for the ride. Heston, we have Penny Hems has got in touch. Hello, Heston, Jay and James. I would like to submit an unusual flavour pairing. Her mum introduced her to it when she was young. She doesn't know the origin of it, but she thinks it's from the 70s or 80s magazine, which sounds about right. It's celery cut into sticks and smeared with peanut butter. Unusual, but it works, and it always makes her think of her mum, which is lovely. And she's also suggested Marmite on toast with a boiled egg for heavenly for umami flavour followers. Both of which, again, one of those ones sound completely logical, right?
Makes complete sense to me. Yeah,
I think the peanut butter one would be great.
Peanut butter sounds delicious. Yeah, you could just dip your celery sticks straight in the jar.
And that rich sort of egg yolk running over the sort of salty umami Marmite. Yeah. Seems so wise.
I thought that feels like one I've had, right? It feels like one of those ones that I must have done that at some point. I also like the idea of celery sticks with Nutella. Basically, most things with Nutella would go quite nicely. Little in this world that Nutella
you remind me of Elf. Is it Elf, the movie? The Christmas movie, Elf. So just anything that's got bonbons or sugar or honey.
Syrup is made.
Yeah, maple syrup, it works.
The American recipe for breakfast.
There was always something about sort of celery and salt, wasn't it? Yeah, I mean, you dip your celery stick into salt and you eat it that way. It's one of those ingredients that, I don't know, I always feel it's underexploited, celery. I mean, it's obviously the backbone flavour-wise of many dishes, like risotto, which we might talk about today, but, you know.
That's an interesting point, because celery and salt, and you have celery salt you put on eggs. Now, if anyone's ever tried to juice a celery stick or celery sticks, then reduce the juice by a half or 3/4. It is so salty. So celery, I think, contains an awful lot of water and an awful lot of salt. Now, I wouldn't
imagine it contain loads of salt.
I just think it's interesting. I don't have an answer. It was just expressing a thought.
Meanwhile, Daniel Kushner's got in touch. Hello there, Heston, Jay and James. My name's Daniel. I'm from South Africa. Oh, how exciting. I love our South Africa. We've got people from all around the world saying hello. In February, I started a 2-year programme at a culinary school here in Johannesburg. Congratulations, Daniel. Every morning on my way to school and every afternoon, I've been listening to your podcast. It's quite exciting. I think we're pottering through the middle of Johannesburg. I want to send through an email to thank you for putting out the podcast. I've learned so much from listening to it over the past few months. I've even had many times in class when the chefs asked me a question and I could think back to an episode for the answer. Oh dear, that's a bit worrying.
That's great, isn't it? Especially as all our answers are based on very hard scientific researched fact.
Exactly. Daniel, please do look at a book as well. He said, thank you so much for anything. But while I have your attention, I would like to ask a question. Maybe this is his homework this week. I've always managed to ruin steak. For some reasons, no matter what I do, I always overcook it. Occasionally I'll get it right and have a rare to medium rare piece, but I cannot seem to replicate the results all that often. Any tips for making sure I get the correct doneness consistently? Kind regards, Daniel. Thanks for that, Daniel. Heston, steaks.
Okay, basically, get a pan, put it on the heat, full heat, no oil at this stage, and just leave it on the full heat for at least 5 minutes. Maybe 10 is even better. If your steak can be at room temperature, that's even better. Then you can season the steak before or not, as you wish. Pour some oil in the pan, but put the steak in the oil very quickly after you've put the oil in the pan. If not, because the pan is going to be so hot, so it'll be smoking. Put the steak in and flip the steak every 20 seconds maximum. Then you have a choice. I would suggest a probe, a thermometer. It will take, so from a temperature point of view, a blue steak is about 45 degrees centigrade. A rare steak, this is in the center, it's 50. Medium rare 55, medium 60, medium well 65, and well done 70. Now that, when it's smoking in the pan, you need to remove the steak 5 degrees before you want your level of doneness. So if you want your steak to be rare, 50, take it out of the pan at 45. That's where the probe becomes very handy. You just pop the probe make sure it goes into the middle of the steak. When it gets 45, take it out. But you've been flipping the steak. Put the steak on a cake rack, not a plate. Because if you put it on a plate, you will sandwich the heat from the one side of the steak between the steak and the plate. So that will continue to cook. So you put it on a cake rack so there's air around it. If you don't have a probe, there is a very old-fashioned way of rough, but it's useful enough of telling whether a steak is rare or medium or well done. So take your hand.
I have my hand.
Now, without any tension, put your thumb and forefinger together softly to touch. Then with your other hand, your other forefinger, touch the fleshy bit of your hand between your thumb and your forefinger.
Gotcha.
Is that technically the mound of Venus or something? Is that what they call that bit of your hand?
That's very grand.
Oh, very grand. Sounds a bit dodgy and very grand.
I might have just made it
Mound of Venus. Right, touch your mound of Venus. That sounds like something from a Cooper novel.
So then, remember that texture. So that's more like, that's more your rare, between your sort of blue to rare steak. Now, put your forefinger and thumb together. But don't squeeze, just put it together and touch the same piece. It's slightly harder.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Yeah.
Now go to the next finger, a bit harder. And now put your little finger and thumb together without pressing, and then you get more well done. So you see how your mound of Venus has become, I don't know how you would explain what's happened to my mound of Venus. I've gone to the doctors.
His teacher.
But your steaks come out just right.
Daniel, how did you get such a good steak? I've been touching my mound of Venus every night. Heston told me to do it.
Yeah. But then, so then, when the steak is on the cake on your grill, leave it for at least 5 minutes. Closer to 10 is better. and then
your cake rack grill.
Your cake, yes. So it's had air around it, and then serve it. That's it.
It sounds so simple, but those little things,
Yeah,
the use of the probe sounds really interesting.
The probe will make such a massive difference. Be brave with the pan, but please, please, please do not put the pan on the full heat for 10 minutes with oil in it. Otherwise, the oil would ignite. The pan won't melt. If the pan melted, it wouldn't go past the health and safety kind of checkpoints. And if your gas or your induction or your halogen hob or whatever your hob is, it's got sort of 1 to 9 in settings. If it was dangerous, they wouldn't have that. So just put it on, put the pan on, leave it on. But just put the oil in just before you put the steak in. And here's another important point. If you're going to do 4 steaks, remember that those steaks, and this is why it's more beneficial for the steaks to be at room temperature. If you take them out of the fridge, they're cold. So if you put 4 steaks in a smoking hot pan, they will very quickly bring the temperature of the oil in that pan down, and it won't fry so much. It'll start to sweat. So if you think your temperature's not hot enough, take the steaks out and leave the oil to actually get hotter again. Does that make sense?
That's a good point, actually. I wouldn't have thought of that. The volume of meat in there will change the temperature, won't it?
A really big difference.
Thank you, Heston. Anyway, Daniel, hope that helped. That was really interesting. I'll be having a go at that tonight. Wonderful.
And Daniel, good luck, please. And if you set your house on fire, I apologise.
James, yeah, we didn't say a word.
If your mound of Venus burns down.
So now we shall return or enter the world of rice. And just before we came on air, we were having a conversation where we all realised just how big a subject rice actually is, which I know sounds obvious, but when you start looking into it and reading around it, it's incredible, right?
Well, there's several thousands of varieties of rice, and the history of eating rice or cultivating rice or living with rice, however you want to say it, goes back nearly 10,000 years. Probably longer, but I mean that in terms of the current record book information we have. So, as you said, it's grown everywhere apart from Antarctica. So you think about all those areas of the world for 10,000 years and all those millions of people and all those varieties of rice and all the forms that rice comes in, as you mentioned, from risotto to Rice Krispies, from curry to sake. It is such a massive subject. So I think that this conversation about rice is a bit of an overview. Then we can do a podcast on risotto. We could do a podcast on Rice Krispies. We could do a podcast on sake. We could do. It's a fascinating subject. That's something so little. You can argue. Did we cultivate rice, or did rice attract us to cultivate it? So much like, when you have flowers and the pollen attracts bees and birds to pollinate the flowers, who discovered who? Who pollinated who? I don't have an answer, but it's an interesting question.
So maybe a good starting point then is we all hop inside our little submarine. And Heston, why don't we start with a grain of rice? Take us into what actually is a grain of rice, where it comes from, and what we're seeing inside the thing that we take so much for granted. We use it probably most days when we're cooking, certainly around the world, and don't really pay a great deal of attention to it.
Well, basically you've got rice and wild rice, a bit like chocolate and white chocolate. Wild rice is technically not rice, so let's put that to one side for the moment, because it doesn't behave differently, its structure is different. So let's take rice. All rice is basically brown rice. And over thousands of years, human beings have found different ways and different levels of removing the casing of the rice. So think about all rice as being basically brown rice. You remove the casing, then you've still got, it's not just a grain of rice. From the outside to the inside, there are different percentages of proteins and fats and starches, and there's different starches. So there's amylopectin and amylose, for example. So then you have the question: what's the purpose of what am I making the rice for? So how much of the outside layer do I want, and how much of the inside layer? So if you take sake, for example, the most expensive sakes remove up to 50 to, well, maybe in the rare cases up to 70% of the rice. Because they want less protein, they want less fat. What they want is the starch. So when they mix the yeast or the fungi or the other ingredient that's going to activate the fermentation process to make the sake, they don't want proteins and fats. So you remove all of that. If you want to make...
Is that through boiling? Is that through boiling and heating?
I know.
That's how they remove those?
No, so the removal is called polishing. You polish the rice. Now, it's not taking a can of Mr. Sheen and a little duster.
You know me too well. To polish my rice.
Imagine, life is too short. Or maybe it's not, who knows?
I bet there's someone in the fat duck there who is polishing individual grains of rice.
So that the classic way of polishing rice is you tumble the rice with itself. So you put the rice in a barrel, and I suppose in the olden days you would spin the barrel, probably with a handle or something. So the rice then tumbles. But imagine a tumble dryer. So the rice is sanding itself down against the other grains of rice.
And the outside layers just turn into sort of a dust and fall away through the...
Yeah. Huh. And then you can... The very important thing is when rice is grown in rice fields, where the water comes from. So is the water, if it's coming from underground, it would naturally have a bubbling effect. I mean, I'm not saying you're going to literally see the surface of the water bubbling. However, in a sort of maybe non-visible level, that water is turbulent enough to stop it being stagnant. This bit's very important. And in parts of Italy, when they normally around Milan is a very big sort of Italian home of rice growing. There's flat fields. So where does the water come from? How does it arrive in the rice fields? If it's not moving enough, they then take some of the water and find a way to pour it in. Like, imagine if you know that theory that water goes down a plug hole in the opposite way in Australia than it does in the south than the north of the world. It's nonsense.
Is it?
Same way.
I've always tried that as well.
But if you leave the plug in the sink, so let's say you've got the plug on the chain, it's not in the plug hole, but the plug just happens to sit at 2 o'clock from the plug hole, that will seed the movement of the water. If the plug is hanging at 4 o'clock or 6 o'clock, all of these things will affect the vortex of the water going down the sink. So the movement of the water that the rice is grown in is really, really important. Then obviously you've got the harvesting, then the polishing.
How do this is a very ignorant question, but the rice itself, the grains of rice, they're grown, are they underwater? How do they harvest? Do they literally pull off grains of rice off the plant? I've never seen anyone harvesting rice. I don't even know what it looks like.
That's a good question, actually.
I wonder if James, do you? Do you
know? I don't know. I filmed in Milan with an amazing rice company, but I never went into the physical harvesting. I'm sure there are like picking grapes off a vine. I'm sure there are many ways of harvesting rice. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I'll have a look, but I'm sure it can be mechanised, and I'm sure a lot of it's still done by people up to their waist in water, pulling rice out.
And it's actually, we talk about the importance of our relationship with food. What we don't think about, we think about a big bowl of rice as cheap food. If that rice has come from parts of Asia, for example, there will be families paid a very small amount of money whose whole livelihood depends on them harvesting rice. So if something happens to the water or to the weather conditions or something else, they might go without their monthly income. They might not be able to eat. So if you can remember that, it gives so much more value to that grain of rice and that bowl of rice, as opposed to, I'm really hungry, I'm going to have a massive bowl of rice, I'm just going to waffle it down while I'm watching TV and not even think about it. I think there would be a big difference.
It's a lot of water as well, doesn't it? I mean, to grow rice takes a lot of water for each grain of rice. There's a lot that goes through it and in it. Just for those
where
single
does
grains
that
of rice.
water come from? And
you're right,
how
it's so
does
thrown
it
away
move?
as well.
Yeah.
I wonder how it's imbued into it as well. In terms of, we talk about the growing of grapes and the difference of the soil conditions and the water that passes through them and the sun and all those things. And I wonder if it's similar for rice, if the taste and the flavour of it can change dramatically depending on the water it's grown in and where that's come from.
Yeah, I mean, you can already see that this. I think we will have several more podcasts on rice, because the amount of questions that that have already arisen over a really, what you think is one little grain of rice is actually a universe in itself.
Bringing you back to the sake, because you were telling me, so you're tumbling it to get rid of the different outer layers of it. And what they'd do is, for that sake, that very expensive one you said, they'd keep doing that until there's only a very small amount of it left, right? So
because they want space. When you make alcohol or make a fermentation, your potential sugars have an effect. Sugars and starches have an effect on that conversion process into alcohol. With rice, you need to add. With grapes, you don't so much, but rice, you will need to add some form of fermentation agent, a trigger that add to the rice, and then it starts to ferment. And basically what that's doing is creating bacteriological activation. So all the little bacteria, think of little bacteria, they're little human beings or little creatures that then start to get activated. They produce gases, and all their vibrational energy will have an effect on the sugars, on the aromas, on the potential alcohol, etc., etc.
So in terms of your adventures with rice over the years, do you remember when you first started cooking it in a professional in one of your kitchens? You actually first started looking at rice?
When I first started, I mean, it was way before the fat duck. It might have been rice pudding, for example. That might have been a nostalgic drive to look at rice pudding. But in fact,
I didn't think of rice pudding. That's another one, isn't it? Where you don't
it's huge.
Think of it.
Crab ice cream and crab risotto. Why crab risotto? I think I was looking at umami. The taste of umami, and fermented rice has a lot of umami. And in Italian food culture, you would never put rice with parmesan or parmesan with rice in a risotto that was made with seafood. You just don't do it. But it didn't make sense why you didn't do it. I mean, if you don't, the only reason that would make sense to me is, I don't like the taste of that. I don't like it. Okay, fair enough. But as a rule, it's not right or wrong. So I made a crab risotto with parmesan, and I used two types of rice, and I had two types of rice that had been polished to do two different levels. So one, with the rice that was less polished, I wanted the nuttiness from the rice, and the rice that was more polished, I wanted the starch for it. So I made one as a stock, and then made another one to cook the rice, and then I washed that risotto by spreading it out onto a perforated tray and then washing it with the stock that I made for the other grain of rice. And then, I mean, this is bizarre because I'm sure when people don't have much money and they're harvesting rice, they just boil the rice. So it's like I'm making a ridiculous amount of work. Part of the story of my life, actually, over something that is intrinsically really simple. But then I washed the starch off the rice of the risotto to cool it down, because this was in a restaurant. And then that water that I washed, or the rice stock that I poured over the hot risotto to cool it down, also washed some of the flavour and the starch from the risotto into a bowl, and then when we served it, I reheated it with that collected juice. But my whole motivation was, why can't you put parmesan with rice in a risotto and seafood? In fact, crab has an awful lot of umami, so does parmesan, so the two together made a big impact. Now, for me, I wouldn't think about putting parmesan in a rice made with a risotto made with oysters. Maybe I wouldn't. But maybe it works. I don't know, but it made sense. It made sense to me to do it with crab. That led to the crab ice cream, which then led to my discovery of multisensory. My first relationship with rice. Do you know where it started? Snap, crackle, and pop as a kid.
Oh.
Rice Krispies.
Of course.
I was going to ask about that. That was going to be, because it's a really fascinating thing, rice. There's so many different ways. Obviously, I wondered if Heston had I know in your risotto for perfection series, you used a little bit of puffed rice. And
and we puff
How do
the
they
rice
make that? How do they
ways.
make Rice Krispies? What is do you know the process of making Rice Krispies?
Yeah, you basically need to cook the rice to break it down and make it more moist. And then you've created more that potential, or that moisture when fried expands in the rice, and that creates the puffed bubble bit.
So you just put it in hot oil or fat?
But after it's cooked, no, not just. You can also dry it. So it's a bit like triple cooked chips in the sense that with the triple cooked chips, I thought what makes chips go soggy, in fact, it's mainly the moisture that's contained in the center of the chip wants to evaporate, and that evaporation of that moisture then softens the crisp wall of the chip. So you want enough moisture to be able to create potential bubbles, but not too much. So you could, and you're never quite sure because you don't know how dried the rice has been. It's like lentils or even haricot beans, green beans that come from Kenya, for example. Some of these beans might have sat on a runway in Nairobi for 2 or 3 months. They're dried.
This is one of those things we discuss in awe some of these giant food companies. And I remember it sounds like a similar thing. If you imagine Rice Krispies, much like when we were talking about tea bags, the fact is the sheer volume of rice they must have to use for Rice Krispies every single day. However, they won't be all from the same paddy fields. They might not even be from the same continent every time.
No.
And yet they'll have to adjust the different temperature levels to make sure it all comes out. Because I think if we gave any of us a bowl of Rice Krispies, you'd know if it was right or wrong. You know when you get the value brand
what
ones,
you'd expect. Are they not quite the same though? Because the box is not the same. If somebody took a value brand and put the real Rice Krispies in it, maybe you'd also think they're not quite the same because you don't have the Rice Krispies box. And something else that I was just thinking about, which relates to something you mentioned a few minutes ago. How much water is used in the making of Rice Krispies, and what happens to that water? Where does it come from? I mean, these are questions that I'm going to go away and start. I might not be doing anything else for the next week and be obsessed about how much water is used in the making of rice and what happens to that water. Is that such a massive waste of water? And if so, does the benefit of sustenance for human beings from the growing of rice, does it affect the amount of water available to people that don't have access to fresh water? Do you see what I mean?
I found out the other day that, and it's very unromantic, but it makes a lot more logical sense, that all bean sprouts, which I always think of a very exotic ingredient, are made in Acton here in London. I was like, really? And there's big vats. They grow them up in North London, or Northwest London, and they're growing vats and vats because they need the volume of water to make them, but also they go off so quickly you couldn't transport them from abroad anyway. And it was just this idea of this ingredient I always think of having travelled hundreds of miles to me, are actually just made up the road. And it feels, they grow them in these big vats.
Apparently why Croydon, now this is going to be, I'll miss some bits out of this, I'm sure, because I've just remembered it. There's an amazing perfumier called Roger Dove, been in the business for years, very flamboyant. He's a wonderful man, brilliant perfumier. He told me this story. So if I get it wrong, Roger, then don't blame me. But he told me that Croydon was called Croydon because it was something like old Roman for crocus. And that was the centre of the UK saffron industry for the perfume making. Croydon and saffron. You never know,
James, this is another one we'll have to put through the fact filter,
absolutely.
But I think I'm going to go with that.
Go with it.
I mean, Croydon has never been so glamorous, if that's true.
No, I know.
That's what I was going to say.
I couldn't believe it. Of all the places, it's worth it's almost worth its weight in gold. Saffron, Croydon, saffron,
beautiful Croydon. I remember once you took me for sushi, and you talk to me, and we'll do a separate podcast all about sushi, but just the rice aspect of it, you were talking about the difference that the temperature you serve sushi in general, but also the rice is at, can make a huge difference to the way it feels in your mouth and the flavour of it and all aspects to it. And I was, as you were talking, I was thinking the difference between rice pudding versus sushi rice versus risotto rice and that spectrum of temperatures.
Imagine Thai fragrant rice or basmati rice, or I mean, there are several thousands of varieties of rice, and some of them I got obsessed, a bit unlike me, with the fragrant rice smell. I adore it, and I tried to extract it, but it was quite difficult, from pandan leaves.
Oh yeah, I know the smell you're talking about, and it's a really difficult one to get because it floats away so quickly.
It's warm, it's welcoming, it's absolutely pandan, and if you can get this, I don't even, this sounds really bad. If you can get hold of some pandan leaves, just put them in a jug of water for a few days and it's beautiful. Pandan leaf, lemongrass and ginger, for example. But pandan leaf is that smell. When you have Thai fragrant rice, I don't know why, it is just like a warm blanket. I nearly said a wet blanket.
Warming is that's exactly what I describe it as.
Thing. Yeah.
Nice as a wet blanket. No, warming is exactly what the smell is, isn't it? It gets inside you. It's a really comforting one. I'd love to see you trying to extract it there.
Well, I believe that's a molecule called acetylpyrroline,
yes,
which both rice and pandan share, isn't it? And I think that has so many interesting and complex characteristics, which can either be warm and comforting, but also, depending on the rice variety, can be mixed with some other volatiles, which create some very interesting different flavours, which is part of the charm of different rice varieties. When you go looking for the different subtle nuances of that aroma, is where you have the difference between jasmine and basmati rice, or plain white rice and brown rice. You know, it's there in different ways, and I think that's part of the charm of it all when you're working with rice. I think, you know, to see how you can work with that flavour, and as you were saying, Heston, to get, you know, extrapolate it and compound it, or work with it and against it, is where rice cooking becomes really interesting.
You know what rice goes well with? I don't want to be all lads curry house, but do you remember chicken curry rice half and half? Chaff chips, half rice. Something magical about that mix. I don't know what it is, but just have you never had half and half?
I know of it, but I don't think I've never had it. Half and half.
Have you never had it? Oh, you got to go to working in the Beeb in Wales for years in the BBC club. It was always chicken curry, half and half, and that's all you'd ask for, and you get half rice, half chips, and the two things together. It's just, I don't know if it's a very Welsh thing, or I don't know, but it's brilliant. It's the magical mix.
I can't argue with that. I don't know what to say, Jay.
It's the and apparently, here's another fact: rice has minerals and antioxidants that keep the skin soft and smooth. I should probably eat more rice, shouldn't I?
It's skin or our skin.
I presume our skin. I read earlier there was some something that Chinese girls would be told to make them eat up all their rice. It was basically, for every grain of rice you leave on your plate will be a blemish or scar on your future husband's face, which I think is a brilliant way to get your kids to eat up all
heard of that.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
I always find that a funny thing, that where we're told to eat up our plate of food, like we should be a rubbish bin. Now, don't waste it. Well, surely, if you're not going to eat your food, why don't you just put it back in the soil? Put your food in the soil and grow stuff from the soil, so you're reusing your food. Why would you shove it in your bodies so you don't put it in the rubbish bin? How much damage has been done to human beings by being told to eat up their food, eating through guilt? You didn't eat
How
all
many
the
vegetables have we been put off by me to eat them?
My son's got. My daughter. Normally, they say my son's got a great appetite. Whoa, yeah. Why? Maybe he's so full of guilt that he doesn't want people to think he didn't like the food.
You're not allowed to speak to my kids.
Another podcast, guilt eating.
Eating for guilt.
Talk till the cows come home on that.
Well, just before you move on, just to share a personal torment, my primary school was exactly run by that rule. At lunchtime, you were not allowed out onto the playground to play football or whatever game until you cleared your plate. And so basically everybody had pockets full of beetroot and shoes full of kidney beans.
Imagine when you
Great escape.
You kick a ball and flaying behind it is like it's just a whole vegetable garden.
There's a whole industry of people burying it underneath the playground and sort of getting those strings on your trousers bottoms. That's amazing.
Yeah, I remember my sister once. I actually know you said this. I've just remembered it. My mum, I think it was weekends, or a treat was breakfast, and for some reason she had an argument with my mum. And I think kids have this thing. I think she might have been 5 or 6, but it's one of the areas where children can have control over their parents, and they know it. He just refused to eat, and then the mum or dad gets more frustrated and panicked, and then they try all sorts of things for them to eat the food, and the child realises they've actually got control now. So no, I'm refusing to eat it. I don't know what my mum said to my sister, but I think it might have been quite threatening. So she went out of the room, and my sister managed to lift up the corner of the carpet and put it was basically like half or 2/3 of a fried egg on toast under the carpet.
No,
yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
How long after was it discovered?
Didn't go down too well. Maybe there's other. Well, what about that? Maybe that could be another just sort of question. If anyone's interested, maybe. Interesting places where you might have hidden your food outside of
and the dishes
swallowing.
You hated to eat.
Yeah, or how long you put it in your mouth for, and to look at like a hamster where I'm going to put it in my mouth. I'm not going to swallow, but I'm going to make it look like. Dogs are brilliant at doing that, aren't they? When if you want to give medication to your dogs, they're experts at making you think that they've actually swallowed the tablet, and then like an hour later they've managed to keep it undissolved. It gets spat out somewhere, and you never know the difference.
The low water mark in my childhood was boil in the bag fish. Boil in the bag cod. I remember it vividly. I can still see it today.
Oh my God!
Being forced to eat that.
Findus, they did it. It was. Did they have rice with it?
Parsley sauce.
So bad.
Yeah, with rice and parsley sauce.
There was rice. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Boy, that's it. Parsley sauce.
Yes, and it came out with this really thick, chalky white because it was so overcooked.
I'm getting PTSD. This is off it. It's
Where did you? So Jay, where did you hide that?
Yeah, exactly. That was.
Why does my DVD player not work? Open it up. Hang on a second. What's someone stashed in here?
Well, on that, chaps, I'm afraid we've reached the end of our paddy field for today. But the thing about this episode is we have opened up so many doors that we want to explore in further episodes, because we are going to be doing episodes on curry and sushi and paella and all these different things, because Heston has a weight of you have a weight of research underneath all of these ones. So this one was the one we wanted to open the door on rice.
If you look at it's thousands and thousands of years, and if you think about how many man hours, it's almost it defies belief. Hundreds of millions of human being hours in terms of cultivating, maybe dying to try and protect your area, traveling half the globe to try and live off rice and wheat. I think it's a fascinating. So we're even with very impressive potential Nobel Prize level of scientific research. In fact, we're still only going to scratch the surface.
But Croydon's going to come out of it infinitely better after our podcast. We are lucky enough. We do now know that we have people all around the world listening to us. So please do let us know about your rice experiences and how you cook it. Think about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Malay. Oh, shut up, Heston. There's too many. There's too many exciting things to discover about rice. I still like to know where people hide their food when they were kids.
Yes, where you hide your food. Please do get in touch. But for this week, James, thank you for being there for us for our facts, and Heston, that was a lovely voyage inside rice, which we shall return to. But for this week, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, guys. Really enjoyed that.